Welcome to this lesson of the Polgar Chess University. Today, I'd like to tell you about the power of two bishops. And let's see our very first example. Here we are in this endgame where white has two bishops and black has two knights. As we know, the difference between the bishop and the knight is that each bishop can always stay on its own color, while knights can alternate colors and cover any square on the chessboard. However, when you combine two bishops together, they can accomplish just the same. Therefore, we talk about the advantage of pair of bishops. On the other hand, the advantage of bishops in general over knights are that the bishops are long-range pieces, while the knights are relatively slow in getting from one side of the board to another. Let's see this example that we have ahead of us in this endgame, where white has the two bishops, and because the black knights are so slow in getting to the other side of the board, to protect the queenside pawns, white can gain a pawn and a decisive advantage. Here, white would simply go and attack the pawn on b7. Now, if black moves the pawn to b5, white would have a pleasant choice in capturing the pawn and then attacking it from c6, while black has no defense, or going back to this position. White could also consider in pushing the pawn and then on the following move play bishop b7 and capture the pawn on a6. Looks even better. But what happens if after the bishop attacks the pawn moves up only one square? Well, in that case, the second bishop comes into action, attacking the pawn on b6. Now, if black pushes the pawn to b5, we have the same options as if the pawn would have went there right away. White could trade pawns and then play bishop to c6, or push the pawn and then play bishop b7, going after the pawn on a6. If black, on the other hand, protects the pawn with the knight, then the bishop can simply attack the pawn on a6, and the pawn is lost because after a5, pawn takes, the bishop takes the pawn. So we can see how the two bishops can work together very optimally in such cases. Let's see another example when the two bishops work together even better. We look at this position, we'll notice that white is ahead in material. White has a rook and an extra pawn. So white in reality is up 3 points, if you count the numbers. But being black to move, black can actually force a checkmate in just 4 short moves. If it were white to move, white could give a check himself, and white would be completely out of trouble and would be on his way to win. But since it's black to move, white gets checkmated first. Check on a4. If the king goes to e1, things end even quicker by the bishop checkmate on a5. King went to c1, and now we continue with 3 more checks, and the next, and finally, when the king is cornered, a beautiful checkmate with the two bishops, bishop e5. The next example is a game of mine that I played in my teenage years back in Hungary. We reached this position, and you can see how my two bishops are pasting towards the king side. And here I had a checkmate combination. By giving one of my bishops up, forcing my opponent to capture, and then checkmate with my queen. The next example, again, is a beautiful tactic, and it's a classic game played in 1880, long time ago, by the famous great player Blackburn on the black side. He already sacrificed his rook in the corner on h8, but it was a premeditated sacrifice, and in fact, black is ready for more of it. Quite amazingly, with two more sacrificing, black can force checkmate quite soon. The next move was bishop to f5, even though it seemed that that bishop was in a pin, because now the white queen was attacked and can capture the rook in the corner. And now this is a beautiful collaboration between the two black bishops and the knight. Black has a forceful checkmate in just two moves. And the queen captured the pawn on h3, opening up the diagonal for the bishop to come in to checkmate. Let's see another beautiful combination, also played in 1872, long time ago. We see how the two white bishops are aiming at black's king, and the white knight on g5 is right there at the attack, and so is white's queen. Yet it seems that black has things under control. At the moment, there is no immediate checkmate, or at least so it seems. It's quite important in chess to use our imagination and creativity in order to accomplish our dreams. In this case, if the black pawn on g6 would be gone, would not be there, we would notice that the white bishop could checkmate by moving to h7, thanks to the other powerful bishop along the dark squares. But reality is that that pawn is there for now. However, knowing this, we realize that white has a brilliant combination to force black's resignation. Try to pause for a moment and figure out this very impressive move. And white captured the pawn on h5, giving up the queen. Well, knowing the fact that if this g6 pawn wouldn't be there, that is, would take, let's say, the queen, white would be ready to checkmate, we can understand the idea behind this beautiful combination. So after queen h5, white didn't just play a trick, because also created checkmate threats with queen h7 and queen h8. Therefore, defending against either would still allow the other way to checkmate. For example, if the bishop takes the knight, queen goes to h8 to checkmate. If the knight would move, for example, to f6, trying to defend both, then white would simply remove that guard of the h7 square. And now, after pawn takes queen, the same checkmate is still alive. Or if bishop takes back, then of course we just checkmate with queen h7. Let's move on to a very typical checkmate idea that involves the two bishops. These type of pawn structures very often arise from the Caro-Kann defense or the center counter. There were many examples when black lost fell into this trap. And the solution is, try to figure it out first yourself. The solution is queen captures pawn. Check, forcing the recapture, and then checkmate. What an efficient way to use the two bishops. Let's change a little bit now to a different type of situations with the two bishops. Let's look at some more strategical, positional type of examples compared to immediate justification, immediate tactics. Here we are. This is a famous game by Tarrasch, who was one of the very top players of his era towards the end of the 19th century. In this endgame, each side has two rooks. White has two knights against black's two bishops, and other than that, there are 7 pawns each in a pretty symmetrical way. It's quite clear that black has the advantage because they have two bishops versus white not having them. I'd like you to quote former world champion Max Euwe, what he said about such situations. What is the advantage of a bishop over a knight? It is that it can influence the battle from afar. What does he mean? That the bishops, whether they are, let's say, back on c8, they would control a square on f5 just as well as if they are right next to it on g4. Whereas the knight affects squares only in its immediate vicinity. How can the advantage of the bishop best be exploited? To do this, the knight must be pushed back as much as possible, and then all the time prevented from coming into play. So what he's saying is the bishops are great in restricting the mobility of the knights. And he ends the quote with, "For this, pawns are the most suitable." So in this real game example, we will see how black slowly but surely advances his pawns, on one hand to get closer to the promotion square, but just as importantly, to restrict the opponent's play. In general in chess, preventing your opponent's plans and goals are very, very important. Or even just to take space away from the opponent. Because if you're on a certain square, your opponent cannot be. And in fact, you're controlling additional squares from each position that you have a piece on. So let's see how this game came about. And black did not play the absolute perfect way, but still demonstrated the general idea quite well on how to improve the position little by little. The first move was c5, simply gaining space, moving ahead. White moved the knight to g3, trying to centralize the knight. And black played h5. Now white has to be careful because, let's say if white kind of makes a waiting move and black continues with h4, the knight cannot go safely to the middle because it may get trapped. Going back to this position after h5, white played f3, chasing the bishop back. But black is not too disappointed because, as I mentioned earlier, the bishop is a long-range piece and can pretty much attack key squares even from a far distance just as well as if it would be right next to it. White now decided to play rook e2 with the intent to double up the rooks along the e-file. Black continued with b5, gaining more space on the queen side. And the rook moved from a1 to e1, attacking the bishop on e7. Now in this moment, Black did not want to go to d6 because that would give White a tempo, an opportunity to gain time coming to the middle of the board and attacking the bishop at the same time. Black made a move that does not look so nice, but in reality, it's only a temporary retreat. White cannot take advantage of it. And came knight to e4 and rook to g8. This move has several ideas. One of the main ones is to protect the pawn on g5 a second time, enabling freeing up the other pawn on f6 to play f5. Had Black moved that right away, the pawn on g5 would have been lost. White continued with knight b3, attacking Black's c5 pawn a second time. Black had to protect it, because if the pawn from c5 advances to c4, that would leave the d4 pawn unprotected. So Black played rook c8, defending, and the knight returned to d2, opening up the e-file again. And here, Black made kind of a testing move, moving the bishop to d6, inviting the knight back to e4, and moved back to f8, and White moved back to d2. This type of repetition of moves usually have a lot of psychology around them. One reason why Black may want to do that, even though they are clear that they don't want to settle for a draw, is to simply get closer to the time control. In many tournaments, there are a certain amount of moves that need to be played in a certain amount of time. So therefore, let's say you need to reach move 30 or 40 within 90 minutes or whatever the time control is. Oftentimes, grandmasters would repeat moves just once or twice, definitely not 3 times, because they are not ready to settle for a draw, with the pure purpose to reach the time control and then having more time at their disposal to think things over and make hopefully the right decision, instead of rushing into a decision with little limited time on their clock. There also may be other psychological reasons why a grandmaster or a very good player would want to repeat moves, even though they don't intend to agree on a draw. They may do it to make the opponent believe that they are getting off the hook, defending a difficult position, that they may be ready to settle for a draw. But in reality, it's just, so to say, a little bit playing cat with mouse, just giving them the false impression. Well, this game now continued with Black playing f5, which actually is a little bit of an inaccuracy. As analysis later showed, it was better, more accurate, to play rook g6 first, and only later f5. After f5, White got some activity. White played rook e5. Black has a lot of pawns on the 5th rank, and that's what the white rook is trying to go after. Black played bishop d6, and here White kind of chickened out by retreating the rook. The better move was to play more aggressively and play rook to d5. This is a skewer, not a deadly one, but if the bishop that's being attacked would move away. The bishop behind it on d7 would be lost. Therefore, black would need to look for ways to defend the bishop and not move it away. Defending the bishop with the rook on the c-file would not be a great idea because white would have a little tactic at their disposal by capturing the pawn on c5. And either way black captures, one of the bishops would be lost. After rook d5, black's best option is to play rook g6 when there are quite interesting complications after g4. For example, if black would capture that pawn twice, white would get the opportunity to get a real good game after knight e4. Let's get back to the game. White made a mistake by retreating the rook to e2. Remember, black could have avoided giving white this chance by not playing f5 on move 10 in this variation, but play first rook g6, making sure the bishop on d6 would be defended already before playing f5. And now black prepares to advance the last pawn that hasn't moved yet, the a pawn, by moving the rook to a8. Now the idea is to push the pawn up to a5. For now, white prevented it by playing knight a5. Black played rook b8. White is just waiting, and black is advancing further. White does not have any useful moves, just keeps waiting. In the meantime, black improves the position of his pieces one by one. And now finally, the a pawn was ready to go as well. As you can see, white's position became very, very passive, while black is gaining more and more space. And now a key move, c3. It locks in the white knight on b1, has no moves, and black will be able to create a passed pawn. Pawn took, knight e3, and b4. And black won in a few more moves. For example, after takes, the a pawn will simply move forward one by one, and black can only stop the pawn promoting by giving up a knight. A great example of how such and similar endgames should be played by advancing our pawns and gaining space advantage, while the two bishops are there to restrict the mobility of the opponent's pieces. And finally, let's see something absolutely beautiful. Here is the jewel of the week. Look at this position. It's white to move. Materially speaking, black is ahead. However, it's not hard to notice that the white bishop in the corner, as we said it's a long-range piece, is stopping the black pawn from promoting. And again, it's also not hard to notice that white can give an immediate fork and win black's rook. That wasn't very difficult, was it? Well, this is just the beginning of it. You always need to look for the best moves for your opponent as well, not just of your own. After g4, which is a decisive mistake, black can escape and save the game. Try to pause and figure out this first part of the puzzle. The saving idea for black is stalemate. By playing king g6, pawn takes rook, king h7, attacking white's bishop. The white bishop must move away, and it does not matter where that bishop moves, the black pawn promotes, gives itself up, and creates an unexpected, beautiful stalemate. That was beautiful, but how can white win after all? Well, here is the winning line for white. White plays king f7, restricting largely the mobility of the black king. Now, of course, the threat of the fork is very real and very serious. If black would move the rook to g5, that would take away the only free space from the king and would result in an immediate checkmate. But what about if the rook moves, for example, to h1, trying to assist the black pawn in the promotion? Well, now white can force checkmate in 3 moves. By check, and the second check, and the third one is a cute little checkmate with the pawn. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, learned about the 2 bishops, and we'll be back next week. So long until then.